Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Firewise UK's first ever webinar. I'm Sarah Allen, Education Officer at the Urban Heaths Partnership based in Dorset, working within Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole and Dorset, and I'm going to be guiding you through today's session. The webinar was conceived in the dark days of autumn back in the second lockdown as a way of connecting Firewise UK with our communities, but it seems more pertinent than ever to be discussing wildfire now as we enter our high fire risk season and we're already feeling the impacts of this. Therefore, I'm delighted to be able to welcome both panelists and guests into this discussion about Firewise from both within the UK and internationally. The webinar is being recorded, but guests, you'll remain anonymous and cannot be seen. However, we'd love for you to get involved by using the chat function at the side, which will be open until presentations begin, and taking part in our polling. And at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A option, which you can click on and then post any questions that you have during the course of the webinar. And we'll come to these at the end in the Q&A session. Just tick the box if you wish to remain anonymous. This webinar is exploring wildfire and preparedness, both internationally and in the UK context. Our climate's changing and therefore our risk from wildfire is too. Building knowledge and resilience is paramount in that risk reduction to our communities. We'll first be hearing from Lucian Deaton with the lessons learned from around the world and closer to home. Elliott will then be explaining what Firewise looks like in the UK context. We'll hear from a member of the Fraser Island community in Australia who experienced a devastating fire just months ago. And finally, we'll go to Lin Kettley from Firewise UK, who will provide simple and practical advice about how to make homes and communities safer from the potential risk of wildfires. And we'll be hearing from a community here in Dorset. So to kick off, we're going to run a quick poll. Just bring that up now. Okay, question is, wildfire is a problem in the UK. Do you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? So if you just pop your answers in there, we'll see what the results are in a minute. Just give everyone a few minutes to do that. Okay, so if we can have our results. Okay, so we've got, as we'd probably expect with this particular webinar, we've got 46% strongly agree and 52% agree with 2% disagree. And we know that we've got lots of professionals online today, so that probably reflects that. So thanks for that. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Lucian Deaton. He's coming to us all the way from Denver, Colorado, where it's still bright and early in the morning. So good morning, Lucian. Lucian is Program Manager with the US-based National Fire Protection Association. He manages international outreach and focuses on domestic policy work impacting community wildfire risks. So over to you, Lucian.
Thank you very much. And while I bring up the slides, there they are. Explain the picture behind me was actually the last time I was able to visit the UK, and was very thankful for that trip. In 2019, the Firewise effort had a meeting in Poole, which was a beautiful place for a meeting, about its communications. And the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service was there, Urban Heaths Partnership, agencies from Christchurch and Poole, and really discussed how to get a message of risk preparedness out to residents. And it was great to be a part of that. A little brief background, NFPA, whom I work for, is a globally self-funded nonprofit established in 1896, actually in Boston, Massachusetts in the US, devoted to eliminating death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire, electrical, and other hazards. And obviously wildfire and the threat that wildfire poses to structures and entire communities is one that we take quite seriously. I know right now in Northern Ireland, north of Manchester, of course in Dorset over the very weekend, there have been fires, and it's been good to hear that both they stayed from doing very much damage, and also the rain came right at the good time. Actually here in Denver, it is just as rainy. So we see that. There we are. I want to put wildfire in a global sense into perspective, because seeing whether or not wildfire is a risk in the UK is important to think about what is the risk that comes from wildfire. And behind you in this picture is Paradise, California. This was a community of several thousand homes that in 2018 was impacted by a fire that burned more than half of them. There was major loss to homes, to property, commercial, and the rest. Obviously, the impact to people's lives and their livelihoods have been seen, and there was a loss of life as well. There was an issue with evacuation and the rest. So this is what many people see as that wildfire idea, and it's important to say that wildfire is a natural occurrence, but the loss of communities to fire is not. Fire will have a role in the land, but how it impacts our built environment, we can have a say in. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I want to explore some of those human dimensions, because when a natural occurrence impacts a community and causes any sort of impact to property, there's a lot of human factors that need to be considered that's going on there. It's no longer a natural occurrence. There's a big human piece. The first is how the land use and economic development considerations are being seen on that land. What's it been developed for? What's it being used for? What's its future hope? The local building policies, the regulations, how do they lend to what's being built there, and the spacing, and then the interactions between landholders, the composition and the age of the homes. Is that a factor in their risk? Private property and public perceptions of ownership. This very much an issue in the United States is when people want to live in what we call the wildland urban interface, which is where these natural lands and then our built environment meet. They want to live there because it's beautiful, because they want to be exposed to that. But what are their perceptions of the risk that's there? And what perceptions do they have about themselves, about what they should do? What do they know about that risk and how they should handle it? Obviously, there are issues then of the affordability of homes, the accessibility to deal with the issue, and the accessibility to be a part of that larger context that's educating people about the fire risk on the ground. And in many places around the world, one of the challenges is whether or not the community is even recognized, whether or not the risk maps line up with where people live, whether or not the maps even know that there is a risk there where people live. So you'll see communities being impacted by fire often that aren't thought of as being at risk to the fire in the first place. These are all the things that put that global context of fire into a perspective. But it's not a wall of flame. The ember is the risk to the fire, that universal risk to wildfire anywhere. And what's showing right now is a video by the US-based Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They're a group that has a test facility in South Carolina where they're able to do mock-up of homes and look at a varied amount of risks to structures. In this case, they were looking at embers being blown from a wildfire and landing next to the structure. Now, the ember itself isn't going to hit the home and ignite it. It's going to ignite something that's next to the home or on the home and transfer that fire to now burning debris and then to the structure itself. And as you can see through these, it's what's there. It may be items in the gutter or what's in that 0 to 2.5 meters around a home. Maybe what's underneath a deck that will transfer the fire that at this point may have moved on, but is now affecting and putting at risk a structure. I think in the UK context, it's very much the back gardens, what's in the back gardens, what could be breached and bring fire into the main structure itself. Obviously, by this point, if something was able to catch fire, even backyard furniture that hasn't been put away on a high fire risk day, it can bring fire up towards an eave and obviously bring risk to the rest of the structure itself. So around the property itself, we know that it's the ember, not this wall of flame, that's going to affect a structure. And that a resident-led model for advancing social behavioral change is the best, because once neighbors can talk to each other about what is most often that shared risk coming off of a land into their neighborhood, they can build that rapport and build that local understanding to then advance the understanding of what they can do to reduce that fire risk in the community, and ultimately what they can do to make the situation safer for fire services that are responding to the fire, so that they're able to deal with the fire on the land and not dually a fire on the land and now into people's back gardens. Going out from the property, and in the US context, we look at this, so excuse the feet, but that immediate zone around a home, 1 to 2.5 meters, is where an ember can land and pose the most danger to the structure itself, because it's where it can transfer that flame and then continue that flame up against the structure itself. The intermediate zone comes out to about 2.5 to 10 meters, where a ground fire can creep up to that zone. And there's thoughts of thinning and breaks with walkways and the rest. And then obviously out to 10 to 33 meters is that furthest point from a home, where in the 90s, when they were looking at fire science research, they wanted to see what is the risk to a structure from the radiant heat of a passing fire. And what they found was that after about 100 feet, 33 meters, the fire's radiant heat is not going to affect the home. What's affecting the home then is the embers being blown from the fire onto the land, onto the property. But in the UK context, obviously, there's not going to be that distance between homes. Similar in the US in some places, you'll have homes much closer together. By composition, you may have a lot more brick exteriors, and roofs may be different, but the gutters still pose a risk to an ember, regardless where you are. And what's in that back garden, and what some of the sunrooms and other things may be made out of, could be at risk to an ember landing on them, and how that heat and how that flame is transferred. So the education that goes into what a resident can do, and also what they should listen for, what days are more at risk to others, and what does that mean for things they may have in their back garden. Simply moving those away and keeping their gutters clean may go a strong distance to reducing the risk of a wildfire to their home, coming off of land just like this. Importantly, also, that conversation over that fence line between the homeowner and the land manager about what they can collaboratively do to reduce that risk around them. So with that knowledge of the resident, it lets them say, and this is someone who said in a Firewise workshop not too long ago, we didn't know there was something we could do around their home to protect it from wildfire. And with that, they're creating a conversation. Now, this happens at different levels. This is actually a picture from Bagura in Spain, where agencies got together for the first time to talk about what that risk was in their community to wildfire, and what they could collaboratively do to help spread a public education message. This was the first time they were able to get together on that issue in that way. Public education being led by agencies that people trust within the community, to explain what it means to have that area of bordering between properties, and what can be done around it to reduce risk. Of course, bringing that message directly to residents in a collaborative way. And then around the tables, talking with residents about what can be done. This is actually a picture from Thursley in Surrey, which was a Firewise community back starting in 2012, and a discussion with them about what residents could do to help spread the message about a risk they had off of Thursley Common. From there, it's what's next. And for many, it's found that the Firewise model of neighbor engagement gives the residents something to do after that initial meeting, after that initial outreach from an agency. And what it can lead to is then that peer-to-peer exchange, so that neighbors are educating each other if that model of neighbor engagement is the best, beyond a more broad public education piece about wildfire in general. This in South Africa was a Firewise garden where they were both able to show the types of plants that someone could have around a home, but that are more succulents, more less at risk to an ember catching them on fire and transferring the fire itself, but also was used as a way to beautify parts of their community. in the US, the importance of having those communities come together and receiving recognition from state forestry agencies at annual meetings, at summits, at other events is very important to spread that education message about what other people are doing around their homes. Public education around, in this case in South Africa, they were teaching about actual fire suppression activities that people could do. And then in Chile, this was a meeting 2 years ago where their National Forestry Agency was talking with indigenous communities about what could be done around communities dealing with a persistent drought, which has been occurring in Chile for now over a decade. So that's a broad snapshot of, a global snapshot of that ember being the true universal risk to a community, regardless of how large the fire is, even down to 1 hectare. And also what other areas around the world have been doing with public education on wildfire, and Firewise is that tool for neighbor-to-neighbor connection. I know Andy and Lin will be talking about the success that has been seen in the UK in Dorset, and we've been very thankful to work with the National Fire Chiefs Council, who have been explaining this through their wildfire committee to other fire services in the UK, who have been bringing this education to their residents. So thank you for that, and move on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Lucian, for sharing both your experience and insight with us. There's a real value in us looking outwards and understanding wildfire in the global context, and to be able to draw on the experience that our global neighbours already have. So the nature of the landscapes may be quite different, and the magnitudes may be different, but the solutions in risk management are remarkably the same, it seems. So it's time for our second poll. If you'd like to take a quick look at that, we'll get that up on the screen now. So question is, what is the furthest that flying embers have been known to travel? So is it 50 feet, 100 feet, 500, 0.5 miles, or 1 mile? So have a go at popping that in. Just give you a few minutes for that. And let's take a quick look at our results now. Okay, so we've got majority saying 1 mile. We know we're talking to knowledgeable people here. So 40% say 1 mile, and you're absolutely right. It's 1 mile. I think most members of the public might be quite surprised by that, but it is in fact 1 mile, which explains why we're so conscious of this and why it's part of the solution as well. Okay, so I'd like to now introduce Andy Elliott, who's a station commander with Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Rescue Service and a UK tactical wildfire advisor with research experience in the UK, Europe and South Africa. He's a real-life action hero and has been involved in fighting wildfires across the world. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll see if I can share my screen. So hopefully you can now see my screen. Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation to present at today's Firewise UK webinar. Following Lucian's great introduction to Firewise, I've been asked to put all of this into a UK context. These slides can take a little while to move forward. There we go. Just a little bit about myself. First of all, my name is Andy Elliott again, and amongst other things, I've been a firefighter now for 38 years, and I've been fortunate enough to travel the world learning about fighting and managing wildfires, and through that I've been able to exchange an awful lot of knowledge with colleagues within the fire rescue services, with members of the public, and with land managers about different techniques and methods that could be employed, all the time looking at quite extreme scenarios and trying to bring that back into a UK context where we're not by any means an extreme wildfire nation, but we do have a growing, in my opinion, we have a growing wildfire problem. I was first introduced to Firewise at a wildfire conference in South Africa during 2011. I attended with delegates from around the world and was convinced that the UK could benefit from a Firewise approach to managing our own wildfire risk. I'd seen a number of incidents myself where fires had come very close to properties and where I felt there was a real threat and a growing threat to our residents in the UK. While I was there in South Africa, my own fire rescue service was battling a very large wildfire at Upton Heath alongside the conurbation of Poole in Dorset. This was a difficult incident that required a very large number of fire engines and firefighters over several days to extinguish. There were uncontrolled evacuations and real concern by the residents for the safety of their homes and their communities. When I returned from South Africa, my chief officer of the day asked me what could be done, what could we do to help? I was then appointed as a service wildfire subject matter expert, and we agreed a plan of action based on the Upton Heath fire. I was initially asked to visit all residents living within what we call the rural urban interface, or RUI. This is that very the area where homes are in close proximity to any open habitat that could cause a problem. And we discussed a Firewise type approach. We then created the UK's first wildfire safety leaflet based around the Firewise principles. Other fire rescue services became interested in Firewise, and the National Fire Chiefs Council reached an agreement with the NFPA, as Lucian has mentioned, so that we were able to use Firewise under licence. And in 2014, the UK's first official Firewise community was launched by Michelle Steinberg of the NFPA, and this was at Thursley in Surrey. The village of Thursley is very close to Thursley Common, which regularly suffers from intense wildfires. In fact, had a large wildfire again last year. And these have threatened homes and caused injuries to firefighters in the past. So they, as a community, really had a vested interest. The UK used to have wildfire seasons every 15 years or so, and there's a fairly predictable pattern. These wildfire years are now becoming much more frequent and much more extreme. Spring and autumn are naturally our highest risk times, as this is when the fuels are at their driest point. They've had a dry winter, dry as in there's no growth on the stems, so a lot of the fuel is died off and dried out. During the summer, however, most of our wildland fuels on heathlands and moorlands are in full growth, and they're full of moisture from the ground while they're putting on that growth spurt. However, as our summers get hotter and drier, we're finding that in some years we get drought conditions, which can give us fires throughout the summer. Like many places around the globe, our fires are becoming more extreme year on year. Pictured here is part of the destruction after the Boomtown Festival in 2016 Hampshire. This was a music event, and a very simple fire started what would normally have been a relatively easy to extinguish fire in some stubble, which happened to be being used as a car park. That resulted in quite a large wildfire, which destroyed a large number of vehicles and became a significant incident at the time for Hampshire, with some risk to life as well. In recent years, we've seen an increase in the number of homes and structures being lost to wildfires. This used to be almost unheard of in the UK. This first image is from March of this year, where a number of homes were threatened by wildfire in Wales. You can see the damage to the fences and the gardens. Fortunately, it didn't penetrate any of the homes. The second image is from Little Marlow in Essex from 2018. This fire spread from a field of stubble over a main road and into a small industrial estate. It destroyed a home, several industrial units and vehicles, plus severely damaging a garden centre. Wildfires damaging homes doesn't just happen in other countries. It is happening here in the UK, and it's likely to get worse. And you may have noticed that at least 2 of those incidents started in stubble fields. Wildfires don't just happen in those open habitats, forests and moorlands and so on. They occur anywhere where we've got vegetation that's prepared to burn. And of course, towards the end of the summer, we've got very extensive areas of arable fields, either that have just been harvested or that are ready to be harvested, that are extremely fire prone. And many of these are close to our landscapes and our homes. So where are we today? Well, Firewise UK has become much more structured. UK staff are in place and support from over the pond, with support from over the pond in the form of Lucian and his colleagues. More communities are showing interest in signing up. With the likely impacts of climate change, now is the time for you and your communities to take action and to prepare your homes. Firewise UK, the Beacon Road Firewise community and the University of Exeter teamed up to research the flammability of garden plants. This is similar to the work that Lucian was showing you earlier in, I think it was South Africa, his example. The residents provided samples of the plants in their gardens, which were then analysed in an icone calorimeter. This measures the time to ignition and peak heat release rate, amongst other things. From this, it is possible to determine which plants are more fire prone and those which are more fire resistant, and which plants may generate intense flame lengths beyond 2.5 metres. These intense flames are more difficult for the fire and rescue service to suppress, and certainly beyond the scope of most homeowners with their garden hose. Research and community involvement like this will help us to better understand the real risk of wildfires in the UK. The University of Exeter team are also part of a much wider research collaboration that is creating a UK fire danger rating system based on UK fuels and weather. This will help to provide an early warning when wildfire danger rises. But Firewise is about the community. This may be a few homes, an entire street, or a collection of streets. It doesn't matter. The Beacon Road Firewise community is a great example of what this really looks like. They have preparation days to clear leaves from gutters, to remove fuel and plants that are too big or too close to homes. Talking to each other along with the fire rescue service and the local land managers certainly helps. And perhaps most importantly, getting to know each other and discussing a common concern around over tea and cake or a barbecue. We need more communities to become Firewise. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass you back to the organisers and we'll take questions a little later on.
Thank you so much, Andy. Here in Dorset, our unique heathlands are one of the most flammable ecosystems in this country, and they're also surrounded by urban areas. So people living in those areas are certainly considered at-risk communities. We've already had 51 wildfires in this area since the beginning of the year, with 7 reported over the weekend. And the Wareham Forest Fire of 2020 is still very fresh in our minds. It's great to hear there are practical things that communities can actually do to reduce their risk. We're now going to go to hear an account from Hana Robinson in the beautiful Fraser Island in Australia. Hana runs an ecotourism business out on the island and lived through the devastating fire this year that hit headlines across the world. We're going to go to her presentation now.
Hi, my name is Hannah and I live and work on Gari, Fraser Island. Perhaps you've heard of it or even visited, but if you don't know much about it, Fraser Island is the world's largest sand island. It's the only place in the world that rainforest grows on sand, and it's home to the world's purest dingo. It's a true World Heritage National Park, and people from all over the world come to visit each year. I have been here for 10 of those years. In 2020, Gari Fraser Island hit the headlines all over the world. What started as a cosy campfire among friends ended up burning 87,000 hectares of the 184,000 hectare national park. It burnt for over 2 months and was the worst wildfire that the island has ever seen. Firefighters dropped over 3 million litres of water and fire retardant during the 9-week battle. Though in some places they managed to slow the fire and steer it around sacred indigenous sites, it was only when the rain fell that it finally stopped ripping through the island's fragile ecosystem. We could do nothing but sit back and watch the horror unfold as our beloved adventure playground and home continued to burn. It was horrific. Being the problem solvers that we are and the passionate environmentalists, the helplessness that we felt was just heartbreaking. It was devastating to watch, and I know so many people watching all around the world felt the same. Our minds ran wild with the thoughts, what would be left, how the island would heal, and what would be left of our place. Months on, and we can finally answer some of our burning questions, pun intended. Thanks to the rain arriving, so much is left. We didn't lose our home, and the bush is regenerating at a varied rate depending on the type of bushlands. So much more of the vegetation will take much longer to regenerate, and the scars will remain for hundreds of years yet. But signs of new life are everywhere, and we were particularly excited to see a cicada emerge from its exoskeleton. This is something we'd never seen before, and given how ugly they generally are, we were surprised at how pretty they were when they first emerged. It was quite a magical moment for us, to be honest, a sign we needed to see that the island was starting to regenerate. On my first outing around the island in January, I saw 11 dingoes. Almost all had burnt paws or fur from falling branches hitting them. It would seem that most packs survived, but the challenges of life after the fires are still being felt by our native Wangari. That's what we call dingo. It's dingo in indigenous language. And it would seem that the numbers are dwindling. We believe that this is not only due to a lack of food, but also due to the inevitable increase in fights they're having over territory. The grass trees and the banksia are going nuts. Most banksia species that are in fire-prone regions produce woody seed pods, which open during or soon after a fire, releasing seeds into the post-fire environment. So many native Australian plants are able to thrive after a fire, and some, like the banksia, actually need fire to germinate. Like I said, the burn scars are easy to see, but fortunately, due to the island's hilly terrain, in some areas the fire has burnt in a mosaic pattern, leaving lots of refuge for wildlife and a great starting point for the island to regenerate. The media coverage was non-stop, I guess because the island is known by the world, but so many bushfires go unreported outside of local news. In recent years, Australians have realised just how vulnerable our way of life is to being destroyed by wildfires. I believe that it's so important that we recognise how easily a campfire can turn into a wildfire, and in some cases, as it was with the wildfire on the island, the rain is the only thing that will bring relief. It seems to me that our weather is becoming more unpredictable than ever, and with so many of us more accustomed to living in densely populated areas, very few can actually read the weather. Sure, we can all check a forecast, of course, but we all know the weatherman isn't always right, and regardless, a forecast is not designed to tell you what will happen if your campfire, barbecue, fireworks, or cigarette sparks a wildfire. I wouldn't wish the fear that we felt during those months on anyone. And having had friends that have almost, in some cases, lost their homes in our recent wildfires, it's fair to say that living through this experience has changed my life, and I have a newfound fearful respect for fire. Well, that's all from me, folks. Thank you for listening to my story, and maybe I'll see you on Fraser Island someday.
Hana very kindly recorded that thought-provoking account for us, which illustrates the trauma that a community can experience during and after a wildfire. We wish her and her business the very best as the island recovers. We're now coming back closer to home to hear from Lin Kettley, who is responsible for a Firewise UK project here in Dorset and is working with local communities in risk reduction. So over to you, Lin.
Hi, I'm Lynn and I'm the Firewise Communities Assistant here in Dorset. My role is to identify at-risk communities and work with them to reduce their risks from wildfire. So however remote the risk seems, it does pay to be prepared, as both Lucian and Andy have shown us. Our heaths, woodlands and open spaces are wonderful places, and living next to them is a real privilege. However, wildfires are occurring now in the UK, so what can we do about the emerging threat of wildfire to our communities? So the Firewise project is about communities working together to reduce their risk from wildfires. I think if there's one thing that this pandemic has taught us, it's the value of communities and how they can work together to solve problems. And Firewise would like to build on that and increase community cohesion and resilience. Firewise provides practical, inexpensive steps that homeowners or home occupiers can take to reduce risk. It's equally relevant to individual homeowners or communities. So how can Firewise help? The reason most community plans fail is because they're imposed from the top down without the participation from the people most affected by the plan. So with Firewise, communities are supported by the Urban Heaths Partnership here in Dorset with information and advice, but the homeowners and occupiers run their own Firewise communities. So far, we have produced a basic leaflet giving practical Firewise information, together with a fridge magnet, which was a request from our group. We also have our Facebook page that we would encourage everyone to follow for ongoing information and advice. And as Andy said, we were asked what plants were less likely to catch fire during a wildfire. And working with Andy and our colleague, Professor Wiltshire at Exeter University, I took 3 bootloads of garden samples there for them to test. And they were tested, and we are producing a leaflet at the moment, which is currently in draft form. So watch this space. So the project Firewise is about communities working together to identify and reduce risks, increase resilience, and it emphasises that we have a part to play, all of us, and we can all help ourselves. Firefighters around the country deal with increasing numbers of wildfires every year. But as it's been discussed, they can't do it alone. Wildfires take up huge resources from the fire services, and they're often tied up for days dealing with hotspots and fighting the wildfires. When living close to the countryside, it's important that homeowners really do help to prepare their properties and neighbourhoods for the next wildfire. And inexpensive actions around the home help reduce the risk and support our firefighters. So number one, on our little fridge magnet, which we designed after a request from our Firewise group, clear leaves and other vegetation from roofs, gutters and decks. So as Lucian and Andy both alluded to, anything that's in your gutters that's dry is at risk from ember penetration, so clear them out. Numbers 2 and 3 can be linked. Remove dead vegetation and other items from under your deck and within 10 feet of your house. And screen areas below patios if they're not already filled in. Use wire mesh to prevent any accumulation. So here we see a deck in a garden and you can see that there is a gap underneath. All you've got to do is fill that gap in. Remove flammable materials, for example, wood piles, from the vicinity of your house if possible. So here's a picture of a wood pile, and as you can see, it's underneath the window and next to a door. Again, embers going into that could easily set light to the house. So if possible, find a suitable space in your garden and move it away from the property. Prune trees so that the lowest branches are 6 to 10 feet from the ground. And here's a picture of a house with branches that are touching the roof and the gutters. Now, the first thing to remember with trees, and if you want to cut any branches off, is first to check with your local council if there's a TPO or tree preservation order on it. Once it's established that there isn't, then you can cut down. If there is a TPO on it, then take advice from your local authority. They will advise you. So keeping your lawn hydrated and maintained during high wildfire seasons is essential. And as you can see, my lawn looks like this in the summer, and I'm sure some of yours does. But keep it hydrated and well maintained. Now, if you're in a drought and you can't use a hose pipe and there's a ban in place, then use your grey wastewater. There's always a way round. Dispose of lawn cuttings and debris quickly and responsibly to reduce fuel for any fire. Now, I haven't got a picture for this, but what I will say is that if you do dispose of lawn cuttings and garden cuttings over your fence, that is considered fly tipping. So what we would ask is that if you have a green bin, you put them in there. If not, take them to the dump. And finally, inspect roof tiles and replace or repair as necessary to prevent any ember penetration. And this is a photograph here, and you can see there's a few loose tiles. And if you make reparation now, you can prevent holes. And we're not asking people to do this every week or every month, but just once a year, look round your roof. That's all that's required. So as you can see, that's the end of my little presentation. We would encourage everybody to look at our Firewise page for our information and advice, and encourage anybody who lives close to an open space or woodland or a heath to come and join us, come and join Firewise, and keep yourself safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. There's loads of practical advice there. And it's great to, I think we're going to move on to a community that have been in a Firewise community in their video. So we'll just go to that now.
Duncan and I are standing on Upton Heath at the end of March 2021. You can see the height of the dried out undergrowth and the gorse, and you can also see how close our homes are to the heath.
Locally, Thursday the 9th of June 2011 will remain in people's minds as the day of the worst fire to affect local residents here in Dorset. It was Dorset's biggest heath fire in over 40 years. A fire was set deliberately upon Upton Heath. Residents adjacent to the heath were put on alert that their homes could be at risk as the fire spread rapidly.
Residents were told to close all windows and doors and lock their doors and leave immediately.
The blaze lasted for over 8 hours, but fire crews remained on site for days, putting out small pockets of fire and dampening down. The fire destroyed over 247 acres of SSI heathland, a third of the heath.
In the aftermath, we realised that communication was the key, so we began to set up a local Firewise community. We're a coordinated community now, and we have a plan. People are supported and they're informed. We all know each other. We all have our phone numbers. We can stay in touch. We alert to an emergency if need be, and we can arrange a central point for gathering and getting information. Most importantly, we're all friends. Some households have changed, some people have moved on, and new residents have moved in, but we know who they are and what their capabilities are. We have a communal fireproof box, locked against theft, but to which we all have access. It contains cones to close the road, high-vis jackets, and so on.
We organise regular fire reduction parties to keep the undergrowth down close to our homes and to clear fire ditches. We've lobbied the Wildlife Trust, which manages the heathland, to clear fire breaks, fire roads for fire appliances, and graze cattle to keep the undergrowth in check. So, in summary, we have literally risen from the ashes. Stronger, safer, more supported, better coordinated, and better informed. We cannot prevent wildfire, but we can manage the risk together.
Thank you so much, Duncan and Susan, for that. It's really good to hear a community working together, and they're taking action for themselves and building their resilience to wildfire. We'll let people know more about where they can find out about Firewise information at the end of this webinar. So we're on to our final poll now. So we'll just bring that up on your screens now. Okay, so having heard this, would you consider being part of a Firewise community if your home was at risk from wildfire? So simple one, yes, no, or maybe. Just give you a couple of minutes just to answer that one. And we'll bring the results up now, please. That's good news, isn't it? So 94% of people are saying that they would be interested in Firewise community if their home was at risk. So that's great. And 6% saying maybe. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much. So we're now going to our Q&A session. So please feel free to post any questions that you have. We've got some real experts on the line here today, and we'll do our very best to answer them. So just have a look at those now. Okay. So I've got a question here from, bring it up. Okay, so we've got a question from Ian, who works for the National Trust, and he says, have you considered forming a landowners group to assist in both the education and preparing the land and so on? So I'm going to send that one to perhaps Andy or Lucian, if you've got anything to say, whether that's been done before anywhere else, or if that would be a good idea.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the question. The answer to that is, I suppose, varied depending which part of the UK you're from. At the moment, down here in Dorset, Wiltshire, we don't have a landowners group set up in that sort of form way just for fire. We do have the Urban Heaths Partnership, which is very specifically southeast Dorset, which is made up of local authorities, land managers, and other agencies. But in other parts of the UK, there are groups, particularly for large land owners, for national parks and so on, and these are often referred to as fire operation groups, or FOGs. Information can be found on those, often just by Googling and searching those. So there are various different land owner groups. They're not technically part of the Firewise setup, but the approach is very similar, and there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't be part of Firewise, Firewise UK, though that is predominantly aimed at residents and homeowners.
Thank you. Lucian, have you had any experience that with your work in your communities where the landowners have been part of the solution?
We have seen larger land holdings in the United States, but I think to Andy's point, groups like that can help rally the conversation between landholders, next to communities and the rest. It's also very important to help all those who have a role to play in the land management risk to be able to converse with each other and share that common message. So.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Okay, so we've got another question here, and I'm going to pose this one to Lin in the first instance. Have you had any difficulties in getting communities involved with Firewise UK? So Lin, over to you.
Okay. Yeah, I think certainly during the pandemic, it's been quite clunky, to say the least. But I think the thing to consider is people's perception of their risk from wildfire. We did some monitoring before we chose where we were going to aim our wildfire community group. And we had some very interesting answers when we asked people if they considered that they were at risk, ranging from no, I don't consider I'm at risk, to I've got a 12-foot patio that'll save me, right up to, no, I want to know more. So I think we also have some students who are PhD students who are working with us as well, who are looking into people's perceptions of wildfire and the risk that poses. And I think until people actually realise the risk that they could be at potentially from wildfire, then it will always prove difficult. But I think the way to look at it, the best way to look at it, is to, like the urban heaths, it's to approach it with a partnership, because everybody has something to bring. So we've got land managers, we've got fire service, and the more people that you can get around a table to look for the solutions. And the important thing is not to forget your communities. They need to be part of the conversation. So have the conversation with at-risk groups, people in your areas that you think are at risk. Have the conversation with them. And I think also, just as a last thing, most people now have working smoke alarms in their homes. I look at Firewise as being the smoke alarm for your garden, and maybe fire services could look at including Firewise advice when they do their safe and well visits to potential at-risk communities. It's just a thought, guys. Let me know what you think.
Thank you so much for that, Lynn. That's a great answer. Thank you. Okay, just see if we've got anything else here. So I've got a question here from Natalie, and it says, what can landowners and managers do to assist with Firewise? So I'm going to ask perhaps Andy and Lucian if either of you want to answer that one. Perhaps Andy again, first instance.
Yeah, very happy to jump in on that. And I see there are a number of similar questions on that little chat group and Q&A session. I think involvement of land managers is critical to this. Lucian spoke earlier on about the distances that we're looking to manage fuel around a home. And one of the things about the UK is people don't have massive gardens on the whole. They tend to be smaller than those in the States and other parts of the world. We're closer together. And often, as was seen in the last video from the Firewise community in Beacon Road, those areas of nature reserves, of heathland, of moorland and forestry and so on, they can come right up to the back of people's properties. So it's not actually possible for the resident to manage fuel within 30 metres of the home because it doesn't belong to them. So just having the cooperation, having the conversations. So if you're a landowner, a land manager, and you own property, manage property adjacent to housing estate or dwellings, or you may even encircle some individual homes, then just having that conversation about how you can manage and reduce the fuel load. And if that's a joint conversation with the people at Firewise UK to determine what fuel reduction looks like, then that's great. But it's impossible for the residents to do without the cooperation of land managers. And that has been a problem in the past. And of course, the residents have their bit to pay as well. Lynn mentioned earlier on about fly tipping and the tendency in some areas to dump rubbish over garden fences. It's no longer your problem. Well, that becomes a problem for the land manager. So if it's a true community approach, then there are opportunities for both parties to talk to each other to resolve any potential difficulties and issues that exist, and then to move forward in a Firewise manner. So I think it's critical to have land managers on board.
Great, that's great to hear. Thank you. Lucian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Andy summed up quite well. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a question here from Eddie. Does Firewise encourage community groups to engage with local authority and forest commissions regarding funding for fire breaks and fireproof boxes and leaflets? Andy, I'm afraid that's going to be another one for you.
And possibly Lynn, I suppose.
No, possibly.
I think in many cases, this is all still relatively new. While Firewise has been going for some time, Firewise UK only has a number of limited communities at the moment and limited contact. And a lot of this is yet to be determined. And I don't think there is a single checklist or design you can use for a Firewise community. Each one is unique and individual. And I think it's certainly appropriate for Firewise UK to have conversations with groups like the Urban Heath Partnership, which actually is an excellent example, where land managers, Forestry Commission, National Trust, local authorities, and so on, all come together and they share issues and they look at jointly reacting and responding to problems. So, for instance, the land around some of these communities doesn't have to be cleared by the land manager. That can be cleared by residents, working groups, to create their own fire breaks with the consent and guidance of the land manager. And of course, you also need organisations such as Natural England to be involved to get relevant consents to do it if it's SSSI. So I think everything is on the table and is open to discussion. And the more people that get involved and work jointly to come towards a solution, the more successful it's likely to be. So I think it is very much about, talk to each other and see how you can help out and to resolve some of these problems, to identify firstly and then to resolve the problems.
Absolutely. I'm just going to answer a couple more questions before we sign out today. So we've got a question from Susie here. Have you done much work in how wildfires have been started? And if so, have you worked with communities in reducing these? So I'll ask, we'll ask Lucian first in terms of from his end of the, from his side, what's happening sort of in his area, and then we'll go to Andy a bit closer to home. So Lucian, do you do much on what's the cause of the wildfires before you work with the communities, or is it kind of quite obvious, or what's going on over in the US?
It is an important part of understanding the risks of the community to understand where that fire is coming from. What are the ignition pieces? Is there an education component, as Lynn was saying earlier, about reducing some of those human ignitions? The majority of fires in the United States, many places, are human caused, either intentionally or more often than not unintentionally. There are other places where natural causes like lightning or other things are what causes them. But it's important then for the residents to know what that is, so that they can then understand when they're hearing a fire weather warning or a high wind day or what it may mean. Then they can be in their minds about what they can do. Certainly Andy may have more of a UK understanding on that to be able to share.
Andy, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, very quickly. The ignition source is critical, and as Lucian has said, the vast majority of wildfires in the UK are human caused, whether that's accidentally or deliberately or carelessly, or however we want to phrase that. And I'm personally involved in ongoing research into the likely causes of ignitions in the UK and trying to rule a few things out as well as rule a few things in. So there is ongoing research, not yet fully concluded as to any of those things. But when we get some evidence of cause, and I'll use barbecues as an indication of that, we know that a number of our wildfires have been started by carelessly discarded barbecues and barbecues that haven't been properly extinguished. So there is a campaign ongoing at the moment to try to reduce, not to reduce the use, but to raise awareness around those issues, so that if people do use a barbecue, firstly, they use it legally. You're not allowed to use them everywhere. And if you do use it, that you use it responsibly and that it's extinguished. So yes, there is a connection between identifying the cause of ignition and education strategies to try to resolve that. But it's certainly a huge area of research globally to determine exactly what causes these fires.
Sure. And here over the Urban Heaths Partnership, I'm involved in the education, and we do go into schools. We're running what we call arson courtroom dramas, where the children reenact a scenario. We've just created a crime scene investigation to look at it. So there's whole strands of education that are going through primary and secondary schools. So certainly in our area, we're trying our best to educate our younger people in the first instance. Okay, looking at the time, I'm really sorry. It's great that we've had so many questions. We've still got some more that we haven't answered. But what we will do is we will email answers. At the moment, our website's down, but we'll post some of the answers there as well. But certainly through email, we'll get some of those answers back to you. It's really great that we've been able to have the opportunity to have this conversation here today. Okay, so that's all. It just leaves me to say thanks so much to the team behind the scenes today. So Amy's been on the tech in the background there, Heather, Sophie and Paul, and of course to Lucian, Andy and Lynn, our wonderful speakers, and for their input today. Thank you so much, guys. And thanks too to Hana in Australia and the Beacon Road communities for their first-hand accounts. It's really good to have that information from them too. And finally, our biggest thanks goes to you, our listeners, for participating in this webinar and for getting involved in the wildfire conversation and what we can do to build resilient communities. If you'd like to learn more about Firewise UK, or would like to start a Firewise community, please do get in touch. Our details will be on the end slide of the webinar. We'll also post ongoing advice on our Facebook page, so please do follow us. We'll also be posting details of the International Wildfire Preparedness Day, which is on the 1st of May. And if you drop us an email with any of your questions, we'll get back to you with answers to those. So keep in touch, spread the word, and above all, stay safe. A very good afternoon to you all.